Hi, I'm Sharon Pratt, host of IPPH On Air. IPPH, the Institute of Politics, Policy, and History, housed on the campus of the University of the District of Columbia with the mission of rediscovering the history of Washington, D.C. while drilling down on touchstone issues of the day, issues that have perennially plagued our nation. And as you know, because of the consequential nature of this election cycle, IPPH is hosting a one-month special election series. So today we talk about growing protests, endless lawsuits, contesting possibly the inevitable. And to do that, we have some experts on constitutional law. It happens to be the Honorable Jamie Raskin from the 8th Congressional District of the great state of Maryland, who is a key member on the House Judiciary Committee. And finally, we have the 35th clerk of the U.S. House of Representatives, the Honorable Lorraine Miller. She can tell us how it's supposed to go in terms of a pro forma process when the Electoral College votes are presented to the 117th Congress. So happy to have you here for IPPH On Air. The Honorable Jamie Raskin, who is a member of the House of Representatives from the 8th Congressional District of Maryland. And you serve on a lot of key committees for these purposes: Judiciary, Oversight and Reform, I think Rules Committee. I'm not sure which one governs here. But what I do know is that Speaker Pelosi has wisely embraced your talents to help her should we have a problem this election cycle. So thank you, Congressman, for being here.
Well, it's totally my pleasure, Mayor Pratt, and it's always an honor to get to be with you.
Well, thank you for saying that. Now, right now, it looks like it could be a blowout for former Vice President Joe Biden, but if it is not, and almost always the numbers get tightened up as we get nearer to the election day, there is a chance, if the election outcome is less than clear, that this matter of selecting the President of the United States and even the Vice President of the United States could end up in the United States Congress. Is that correct?
Ultimately, it's correct. There are a number of steps to get us there, and I'm happy to take you through each one of them. I mean, I think it's ultimately unlikely, but it could happen.
So my understanding, and maybe this is a very superficial understanding, but there's the 12th Amendment that applies in one instance if you don't quite reach 270 electoral votes, I think. And then there is the Electoral Count Act that applies, I guess, if there's a contest as to which slate of electors apply.
Well, that's pretty good. The 12th Amendment actually describes the process of counting the electors. And then in the event that there's a failure of anybody to assemble a majority of electors, then it's kicked over into the House of Representatives itself for a so-called contingent election. And you might ask, why would the president be eager to get the election kicked over into the House of Representatives, where, after all, Nancy Pelosi's speaker, and we've got a 235 to 200 majority? The answer is that under the 12th Amendment, we don't vote one member, one vote. We vote one state, one vote. So California gets a vote, Idaho gets a vote, New York gets a vote, Montana gets a vote. Presently, the Republicans control 26 of the state delegations. We have 22, and 2 of them are tied. Pennsylvania, which is 9-9, and Michigan, which is effectively 7-7.
And it won't be the 116th Congress that votes. It'll be the 117th Congress.
It's the new one.
It's the new one.
There's a shadow election taking place right now, not just for the popular vote and the majority in the Electoral College. There's also a behind the scenes, if you will, or underground struggle to win these congressional delegations in the states. So we're on the Democratic side, we're investing in the Alaska election. We're investing in the Montana election. Florida, we're just down 1 vote. So if we could turn it there. We're defending some states where we are up, but we can't afford to lose a seat, like Iowa, like Maine.
And what does it look like? I mean, do you think the Democrats will capture 26 delegations?
Well, a rising tide lifts all campaign boats. And right now, there's a big blue wave coming in. This is why, from our standpoint, we just We believe that there's going to be a big popular vote majority. We believe there's going to be a big electoral college vote majority. We need to defend it at every level. That means we need to defend it against voter suppression. We need to defend it against voters getting kicked off the rolls. We need to defend it against all manner of mischief at the local level, last-minute relocation of polling places without telling people, all that kind of stuff. And then we're going to have to defend it in court, in state court, in federal court, in the state capitals, especially in the swing states where Republicans control both the state House and the state Senate. And that's 4 of our major swing states. That's Wisconsin, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Florida.
So, but let's say the Democrats are winning in the state of Pennsylvania. So it appears by popular vote. But then I've seen scenarios, and they may not be accurate projections, where the Republicans say, no, there's too much confusion with these mail-in ballots, and we can't risk not presenting a slate by the 14th of December. Does the state legislative branch have a power to override the secretaries of state?
That is the danger flashpoint, right? Where you've got a Republican-controlled legislature in a state that we think is going to go big for Biden. Say, Pennsylvania, where Biden could win by 1 million votes. He's extremely popular in that state. He grew up mostly in Scranton before moving to Delaware. The Republican legislature might pick up a cue from Donald Trump and say, oh, there's so much confusion, there's so much chaos, there's so much fraud, and not based on anything, but just saying it. And then say, therefore, we're going to overthrow the popular election results. We're going to nullify the current state election law. We're going to adopt a new election law which purports to appoint electors for Donald Trump or for, you name it, Mike Pence or somebody else. Now, there are several problems with their doing that. The first problem is that under the Electoral Count Act of 1887, the votes have got to be cast by the state according to a law that was pre-existing before the election. So in other words, what they're talking about doing is specifically contemplated to be in violation of the Electoral Count Act. That's problem number 1. Problem number 2 is that all of the laws that they're purporting to overthrow are laws that were adopted under the existing state constitutional system, which means that the governor of the state signed them into law. So that means that the governor of Pennsylvania would also have to sign into law the statute that overthrows the election and that institutes the new Trump electors. Well, that's a Democrat. In 4 of these swing states where there are Republican majorities in the state houses, you've got Democratic governors. And their voice becomes very important also when we're counting the electors, because when they're finally all sent in on January 6th to the Congress, and the president of the Senate, who's the vice president of the United States, Pence, reads them, you could have rival slates. So you could have a GOP slate coming out of Pennsylvania under this new law. You could have a Democratic slate under the old law, recognizing the popular result. And if Pence tried to say, I accept the Trump electors, the House could object. The Senate, if Democrats are in control, could object. But even if just one House objects, both houses have to separate and then vote. And if both are Democratic, both would say, we're going to reject those electors and we want the other electors. Or if we're divided up, then it's supposed to go to the so-called certificate of ascertainment, which is what the governor of the state issues. So that's back to the Democratic governor of PA or Wisconsin.
So all of this is a reflection, a byproduct of a very troubled arrangement, really, that we've had since the inception of the country, where I guess our founding fathers never quite trusted the rabble to vote. Because, I mean, this is like crazy. I don't think people would accept this too well.
Well, nobody would accept it if we were voting on it today. We don't try to export it to other countries, even when we spend millions of dollars teaching people about democracy. We never even try to get them to accept the electoral college system. But here's the thing, what we're trying to defend is the basic idea of the popular vote and then the electors under the current laws. What they're talking about doing is way beyond the normal problems, the normal undemocratic features of the system. This is an attempt essentially to thwart all of the idea of popular democracy and electoral college democracy, such as it is. But you're right, we're going to have to clean up the whole system when it's all over.
And the other aspect of it that I have to ask about is the District of Columbia, I take it, would have no vote if it got to the House under the 12th or under the Electoral Count Act. District would have no vote.
Well, you raise an important problem because right now the district under the 23rd Amendment to the Constitution, 1961, is treated as though it were a state for the purposes of appointing electors. It gets the number of electors it would have if it were a state and had congressional representation, except it may not be more than the smallest state, which is why DC's basically been stuck at 3 electors. Even if it could go up, the terms of the 23rd Amendment keep it down. The 23rd Amendment itself is silent on the question of the district's participation in a contingent election. And you can make good arguments on both sides. I mean, the argument against it is simply that the 12th Amendment talks about the states, that it's a majority of the states voting and that the members will vote by state. On the other hand, the 12th Amendment was added to the Constitution before the 23rd Amendment. The 23rd Amendment came after, and you could say, well, even though it's silent about a contingent election, it expresses a constitutional preference for voting and for democratic inclusion for people in the District of Columbia. And that should be vindicated by allowing the delegate to vote for the district in the same way that the one representative would vote for Vermont or Montana or Alaska. So I don't know whether we get there or not. Obviously that's going to be up to Eleanor Holmes Norton and the people in DC to argue about whether it's worth trying to press that point or not. It's certainly worth demanding that the actual votes of the people and the electors across the country be respected rather than trying to kick it into the House of Representatives where people from DC are excluded, or maybe excluded.
Right. So I guess it depends on
what the numbers look like as to whether the Republicans are likely to pursue a court strategy or whether they are likely to pursue trying to force it into the House. Because I gather if it's contested, it would be both the House and the Senate would have to agree. I assume even in that scenario, it's a state-by-state
vote. It's not raw numbers. So California votes like Wyoming. It's no different.
Correct. In a contingent election, we vote by state. And before you would bring the electoral count, we're counting electoral college votes, each state is read in order. So through Wyoming, each state is read and then the electors are discussed. And if we can't agree, we go into separate chambers and we vote on it and we go through that process. But remember, all of this is an effort by the president to undermine what looks like it's going to be an overwhelming popular and electoral college vote majority. I think you're right that we are likely to see them try to get it into the courts for several reasons. One is President Trump believes that the courts are going to be favorable to him. He said that when he nominated Judge Barrett to the Supreme Court, that he wanted her on there to take care of the votes, to look at the votes. So that's one reason they're likely to do it. Another reason is that the courts really are now very lopsided in favor of Republican appointees. And the last reason is that there's this bizarre non-precedent precedent of Bush versus Gore, which did kind of lay the template for a conservative right-wing judicial intervention to interfere with the counting of ballots. And that's why I keep saying that the only antidote here is a landslide, because what happened to us in 2000 with Bush versus Gore is it all came down to one state. That one state was extremely close. And so it was very vulnerable to a majority on the court saying, let's look at it and figure out what we need to do in order to arrive at a particular result.
No, it's, they've done a lot of scenarios to game out this election, and some of them are pretty unsettling, because if you have a tremendous turnout and the popular vote is moving in one direction,
And through these procedures, you could end up with a result that doesn't seem, to correspond with that. Then you could have a lot of disquiet in America.
Well, I think so. It's the centennial anniversary of the 19th Amendment, where women finally got the right to vote. There have been all of these constitutional changes that have moved us in a more democratic direction. The 17th Amendment said we're going to elect U.S. senators by the popular vote rather than choice by the state legislatures. The 23rd Amendment, which we talked about, gave D.C. the right to participate. Everything is in the direction of letting people in. And this looks like it could be a last gasp for reactionary, anti-democratic exclusion in a presidential election, even with a president who's looking at an overwhelming defeat by millions and millions of votes. And the public is not going to take that well.
No, I don't think so. Well, it's very confusing. I must say, the more I read it, the more confused I got. These provisions of, trying to apply the 12th Amendment and et cetera. So, but we're very grateful that have had your insights, your wisdom, and very, very heartened to know that you're there providing support and guidance to the Speaker and the Congress. So thank you very much.
Well, I appreciate that very much, Sharon. And there's a lot of complicated Byzantine stuff going on, and a lot of games being played. And we just have to be ready for each of them to fight back at every stage.
Well, it will be interesting. It will be interesting. These are interesting times. Well, thank you very much, Congressman Raskin. You've been tremendous, just terrific.
Always a pleasure. Stay close.
It is a matter of personal privilege to have with us now the 35th clerk of the United States House of Representatives, the first African-American to be the clerk of the United States House of Representatives. In a variety of capacities, served 3 speakers, Speaker Jim Wright, Tom Foley, and then, of course, Nancy Pelosi. Wonderful to have the Honorable Lorraine Miller.
Good to see you.
Oh, it's great to see you. You got to call me Sharon now. It's been too many years we've known each other. When I was mayor and I'd arrive at the house and I'd see Lorraine, I knew I was okay. So, and you are also a member of the Board of Trustees for the U.S. Capitol Historical Society as well.
Yes, that's something I got involved with while I was clerk. We have an office of historical office at the clerk's office, and we maintain the history of the house. And I got involved, and the current president was a former member of the house, and so we knew each other. And so he says, "You got to do this." And then Cokie Roberts, who was a good friend, told me, she offered my name and then called me and told me, "You better do this."
Well, that would sort of end the conversation.
That was in.
So, there are a lot of people have speculated about whether indeed this election in 2020 could end up being contested, could end up being in the House of Representatives. But before we get to that possibility, can you just sort of explain to people how the House typically, in an uncontested year, plays a role in the presidential election?
What would happen is the electors, the 538 electors, would get elected, and then in mid-December, they would all meet in their respective state capitals and cast a vote. Those votes of the electors are sealed. They're sent to the architect of the Capitol. They're sent to the president of the Senate and to the House of Representatives, generally to the clerk's office. We would get a copy of those ballots. And then we would have in January, after the House convenes and the Speaker is elected and everybody's sworn in, we would have what would be called a joint session where the Senate and the House would come together in the House chamber. The President of the Senate, which is Mr. Grassley, Senator Grassley, would preside, and the ballots are actually read. They're open and to tellers, usually from the House Administration Committee and the Senate Rules Committee, since both of those committees deal with the administrative end of the House and the Senate, are selected, and they would be the tellers, and they would actually read it. So Senator Grassley would come in, gavel in a joint session. Now, this is an unusual joint session because you're not going to see a full chamber of House and Senate members because it's perfunctory. It's already established. So many of the members, unless they have a specific reason to be there or they have a challenge, will not attend. So it will just be the presiding officers. And then the ballots are...
Yes. So the members are convened and the speaker is chosen around the 3rd of January. Is that right?
Right.
And then the actual vote or the tally of the electoral votes is around the 6th of January.
Yes.
Because the president has to be, that decision has to be made by and before the 20th of January.
Yes.
So let's say it's contested. I don't think we've had that in least of which I'm aware. I've talked to a professor who did deal with it, had studied the 1876 election, but Speaker Pelosi is a pretty smart woman, so I'm assuming she gets reelected as speaker. I mean, I don't, probably already set in motion who would, be dealing with, who she would task to do that. I mean, for example, I think Congressman Raskin may be playing a role.
Sure. He's on the Judiciary Committee. She would, her modus operandi is not to be surprised. And knowing this president as she does, she is preparing for a worse scenario, so that she does not want to do this at the last minute. So she's prepared. She will probably, I would think, have the Judiciary Committee chair and the Judiciary Committee members, Jerry Nadler from New York, as the chair of Judiciary, would be part of her advisor. She has a lot of confidence in Adam Schiff, who is the chair of the Intelligence Committee, because he was involved with the impeachment and he's a pretty good lawyer. But trust me, she will have every legal advice that she could want at her disposal. And knowing her, she is in the process of being prepared for the worst case scenario. But I tell you what I think she is really preparing for is for a huge election where there will be no dispute, that the turnout this year is going to be great. And she is preparing her members to make sure that their districts turn out and support them. And then conversely, to have a Democratic majority. That's her first priority, knowing her. But on the other side, she is preparing, I would imagine, for the worst case scenario, given who is our president right now.
And of course, there is the 12th Amendment, which doesn't help much in the sense that only thing that clarified was if there's, how the electors have to first pick a president and then a vice president, not any kind of runner-up. But what took me aback, and, you can comment it or not, but discovering that it isn't the House members who get to vote if there's a contest. It is each state just has one vote, and that vote is dictated by who controls the local House. And right now, in 26 of those states, it's Republican and only 22 Democrat. So that could be a rocky road. But as you say, Speaker Pelosi is somebody that always is ready. I mean, she's always
tries to be prepared. Yes, she tries. That is part of our modus operandi is to be prepared. If the question is, will we have a contested race this year? Probably. But if our turnout is good and after the November elections, people see who our president is. I mean, Trump will be barking up a tree if people really come out and vote as we suspect. And hopefully he's barking at a tree, okay? And so that it is clear that, who won the election. And, I was amazed the first time we did the Electoral College, and it was a joint session, and I was saying, where are the members? Because there was a lack of interest. I mean, everybody, it was already established who the president was going to be, and so nobody really was anxious to come to the chamber for a joint session because it was perfunctory. I think the last two times it's been 23 minutes and 24 minutes. So that shows you that this is nothing that people get upset about or rush to unless there's an objection that a member may have. And then it's got to be a senator and the House member to confer on the objection. So it's
in terms of the objection of a particular state vote.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
All right. So for those of us who are unnecessarily anxious about this election, let's say the worst case scenario that they still try to contest it. Someone says you can count these mail-in ballots, they're fraudulent, and insist that the state legislators that are particularly in Republican jurisdictions block the ability of the Secretary of State to forward a slate of electors, and we then have to resolve it. You have served faithfully 3 speakers of the House. You really know this institution. Do you believe our country could weather a serious constitutional crisis of this kind?
Yes. And I say that because we are constitutionally strong. We may have a renegade in the presidency right now, but the institution of the Senate and the House is very strong. Now, you look at, and I say that with a quiver, because now we're going to probably confirm a Supreme Court justice in the next few days that the Senate 4 years ago said, oh, we're not going to do this, in a presidential year. And I bring that up to say, still, given the vagaries, given how people change their minds, the principles of the Constitution will stand, and I think we'll be in good stead because we're a strong country. Now, if the election goes another way, then call me back and we'll have a
post-mortem.
But right now, I honestly think that our Constitution is strong and our mores of this country are strong enough to weather this. Yes.
Well, that's a happy note on which to end this very important and much appreciated interview, this conversation from someone who truly, truly knows how the system works. We at IPPH On Air are really thrilled and honored to have had the Honorable Lorraine Miller.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Sharon. It's a pleasure to be of help. Sometimes the public doesn't really understand how this really works because it gets a little complicated. But I do think our system of government is in great hands with great people on both sides of the aisle who are institutionalists and believe in what this country stands for.
That's a happy thought. I hope that's the operative thought.
Let's keep that happy thought.
Yeah, keep that thought.
The Honorable Lorraine Miller, what an honor it has been for the IPPH On Air series to have you to provide us with insights on how the system truly works. Thank you so very much, Lorraine. It's been terrific.
Hi, I'm Sharon Pratt, host of IPPH on Air. IPPH, the Institute of Politics, Policy, and History, housed on the campus of the University of the District of Columbia, with the mission of rediscovering the history of Washington, D.C., while drilling down on touchstone issues of the day, issues that have perennially plagued our nation. And so, because of the consequential nature of this election cycle, IPPH on Air is hosting a 1-month special election series. And so every Monday at 3 p.m., we have State of Play with essentially the distinguished co-anchors of today. And then later in the week, we host a podcast featuring interviews of experts on prior presidential elections, constitutional law, should someone challenge the outcome of the election, as well as voter registration and intelligence. And so today, we have as our co-anchors, Karen Tramontano. Karen was the former Deputy Chief of Staff to President William Jefferson Clinton. She is an international political analyst and co-chair of the IPPH Senior Advisory Committee. Welcome, Karen.
Thank you, Mayor.
And we have as well the Reverend Mark Thompson. Mark is the host of the podcast Make It Plain, a regular on MSNBC, and also a distinguished member of the Senior Advisory Committee of IPPH. Thank you for being here, Mark.
Happy to be here again, Mayor.
So we had sort of a nail-biting experience over the last few days, but nonetheless, out of it came the election of who is now President-elect Joe Biden and Kamala Harris as Vice President-elect. Would you say they have a mandate, Karen?
Yeah, I think they do. We're talking about 75 million voters, actually over 75 million voters, historic turnout. And in any other context, in any other year, this would be just overwhelming. President-elect Biden achieved over 50%. That hasn't happened in a recent election. The vote was not anywhere near as close as it was in 2016. And people thought Trump had a mandate, and it wasn't. It was far above the results of our sort of closest election in modern times, which would have been the Bush and Gore election, which the difference was like 1,700 votes in one state. So, other than the media's obsession on division and the media's obsession on the 70 million votes that President Trump received, I think, yes, this is an overwhelming, and not just popular support. The president-elect will have over 300 electoral college votes. So I do think there is a mandate here.
Do you share that opinion, Mark?
I think I do. Although the temptation, even for me, is to think of mandate, raw numbers, number of states, numbers, number of votes. I agree with Karen, though, when you're over 50%, which is very unusual, that is probably as close to a mandate as you're going to get. But I would also think the mandate is somewhat subjective, too, not just about the election numbers. Aren't all presidents supposed to unify and heal the country? And so I think whomever would be elected should do that. And I think that's precisely why we're in the predicament we're in, is that the last president elected in 2016 refused to do that. He will probably never admit that he lost because he refused to do that. So I think at the very least, and I think the Biden-Harris ticket has been saying this very profoundly, that this is about healing, that this is about unifying the country. There is no institution, be it a country, be it a business, be it a political party, be it a household, that can continue to function and thrive with the division and dissension that has been created in America over the past 4 years. So I think that at the bare minimum, a mandate exists to heal and unify.
Well, that makes a lot of sense, especially given the percentage, as Karen pointed out, over 50%. Nonetheless, we did have a very divisive 4 years. And while President Trump may have been a gamble in 2016, people had a chance to experience him over the last 4 years, and he actually got more votes. Not enough to win the election, not anything quite like what President-elect Biden got, but he got more votes in 2020. What does that portend? And how should we interpret that? Mark?
Well, as you and I discussed offline last week, Tuesday was actually very troubling for me. Of course, I think we all are comforted by the outcome and there finally being a declared president-elect. But Tuesday was troubling no matter what, because so many millions of people, many millions more, voted for such a divisive figure who has done nothing but display racism and homophobia and xenophobia and misogyny throughout his tenure. It's very troubling that many millions of people would vote for him. And it says a lot about how much more work needs to be done. And, you know, as I was saying to you, Mayor, it's troubling that people would vote for white supremacists like Donald Trump, but then to vote for white supremacists who is not doing anything to prosecute a pandemic that is killing some of his own. You know, I mean, we know white supremacists that wouldn't allow people to die in a pandemic, but he even does that. So that makes it even more stark and troubling. And that's why the mandate issue is still a little difficult for me, because so many people voted for Donald Trump. We have a lot of work to do to get back to the way things were before 2016, where at least the country was seemingly more unified and seemingly more harmonious. We've got to get back to that, and the work is cut out for us.
Okay, Karen, how do you interpret the 70 plus million votes that Donald Trump captured?
So I agree it's troubling, but I want to be cautious that we don't turn that 70 million into a monolith, that 70 million, those 70 million people do not become 70 million Trumps. Because I don't think that's who those people are in terms of all 70 million of them. And, you know, exit polls they're noisy, but there was one data point that I think is interesting. That point was that 30% of the people who voted for Trump voted because of who he is. So now that's troubling, because 30% is giving us something over 20 million people who are voting for someone who is a racist, who is xenophobic, who is homophobic, who is mean, and who will allow people to die on his watch. So that is troubling. But I think we do need to do a lot more work. But we also need to do some work to understand where those other 40 million are. I think we had a situation where, you know, the economy was beginning to improve, and the vast majority of people that voted for Trump, their number one issue was the economy, and their number one fear about Joe Biden was he was going to shut the country down again. So, you know, I think, again, we've got to be cautious not to put everybody in the category of Trump, because I do also think that if we do that, it's going to be really hard to heal as a nation, because once we categorize people in this place of hate, and we do that with just half of our country, it's going to be hard to come back from that. And that is not denying that there is racism, homophobia, misogyny, and anti-immigrant sentiment throughout, throughout his electorate. And he just stirs the pot on that, for sure.
No, I think that those are very appropriate observations, because can you imagine you're a restaurateur? I mean, people who are really frightened of continuous shutdowns, though some aspect of may be needed. So yes, I'm certain that had to be an element. What about the lawsuits, nonetheless, that the Trump campaign is pursuing? Rudy Giuliani had a press conference, I think, yes, on Saturday, in an odd venue, but nonetheless, is there any merit to those lawsuits, especially talking about Pennsylvania?
So I think these lawsuits are a message opportunity for Trump. For any of these lawsuits to prevail, they need two things, right? You need an actual legal claim. And it also has to affect the outcome. And in some of these suits, like the one in Georgia, was over 50 votes. It was dismissed, but 50 votes would not have affected the outcome. Pennsylvania, it was about getting the observers closer to, who was reading the votes. So, as they say, there's no there. But it does, the disturbing part of this is it provides a message opportunity for Trump to talk about fraud and the election being stolen. Not to mention, tactically what the Northwestern states did, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, in forcing the so-called Trump vote to come out, and then for the other ballots to be counted that were perfectly legal. But that provided another message opportunity. I think the worry here is not the lawsuits, because I don't think they're going anywhere. But the worry is the day in and day out of message opportunity as he and his advisors continue to file suits that aren't going anywhere, aren't going to affect the election. I mean, let's face it, for him to affect the election, he has to turn Georgia, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Arizona. This isn't Bush v. Gore, one state. This is 4 states, and that's just not going to happen.
Yeah. How about you, Mark? I mean, do you see any merit in it? And also from the vantage point of what Karen is articulating?
Well, as I look at the claim,
message platform vehicle.
As I look at the claims, I don't see the merit, nor do I see what it would change, really. As Karen said, one of the suits in Georgia was over 53 votes. That's not going to change anything. At the moment, if I'm not mistaken, what is being raised in Pennsylvania, aside from the observer distance, which was resolved, there were ballots that did not have proper signatures. People have had, I think, until November 9th to correct those. There were some ballots, I think about 600, that weren't in the proper secrecy envelopes. But those aren't numbers to change anything. So I'm not really sure what difference it makes. I think, too, and I want to just clarify something I said earlier. I'm not suggesting that half the country is a white supremacist like Trump, but I'm suggesting that half the country voted for one. And if, in fact, they voted for one based upon the economy, I still think what we have to engage in is to educate people in terms of zero tolerance when it comes to that behavior. And most importantly, that the economy would never have been what it was if COVID had been addressed by a competent administration in the first place. When Barack Obama was president, people threw this word around post-racial, and clearly it was not. I think the term more accurate for Trump's time in office is post-factual. That things are said and promoted on social media in such a way that people make decisions, even in terms of voting for him, that are not really rooted in factual information. And this administration, more than anyone in history, has mastered the use of social media propaganda and disinformation. So to this point on the claims, there are some people out here who think that he shouldn't concede. Even Republicans are saying that think that there's some merit to the case that he should not concede. And that's very, very unfortunate. And unless we figure out a way to reach people with facts and reality, it will take even longer to heal.
Yeah. Now, I remember you're speaking to the states that you were focused on, Mark, were Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania. Before I ask you, I'm going to ask Karen. How is it that Biden was able to bump up the margins and win those states? So, and, as against 2016, was it his policies? Was it his his campaign strategy? Or was it that people just knew him in that part of the world? What do you think of Karen?
So, I think it was all of the above. I mean, thankfully, the campaign had their own analytics, and they took Trump at his word. Trump said he was going to get Republicans who had not voted in 2016 out, and they estimated there was anywhere from 2 to 3.5 million voters in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, and they were going after them. And so unlike the pollsters, I think what Jen O'Malley Dillon did is took him at his word and made sure that the numbers of people that voted for Joe Biden, be they Democrat or independents or Republicans, that it was going to be a plus up well over 2016. When Jen gave a briefing right after the election, which to Mark's point, the day of the election, that next day, I think all of us were down, and she was confident and, not overconfident, but she was confident. And she said, our numbers are there. So their modeling in those 3 states, at a minimum, was excellent. Look, the number one issue on the issues, as I say, all of the above, I think the issues were if you voted for Biden, you were voting about the coronavirus. And that was your number one issue. And secondly, you were, I think 67% were voting against Trump.
Yeah. Now, Mark, I'm going to ask you about whether you share Karen's thinking as to how got those numbers up. But I also want to ask you about what was a surprise to many, that this time Trump upped his numbers with African Americans, seemingly with men. I think he upped his numbers with Latino voters also, with men. And he ended up still with the majority of white women voters. You want to speak to those points?
Well, the last ones first. I, myself, and some may not agree with me, some do actually though, I'm very cautious about the exit poll numbers in terms of numbers that went up, because it is impossible to exit poll 100 million absentee voters. And I think that's what we kind of got. So I don't think that's true. I'm not ready to say that those numbers are accurate. I think the only one that may be accurate may be African American men, but it's a question of what the percentage would be, whether it actually went up to the 18%. And think about it. We know some things for ourselves. Some of those exit polls say that Black women support doubled from 48%. We know that's not true. It also said that 30% of LGBTQIA voters voted for Trump. We know that's not true too. So I think it's going to take some time to flush out those numbers and do some adjustments, seasonal adjustments, if you will, to those numbers. I'm not even sure that the white women's vote went up. We just have to wait to see. in terms of those critical states, obviously the Biden campaign knew what it was doing in those states, but as always, the African-American electorate once again really came through. And that's why he was the first president-elect to say the African-American community has always had his back, and that he now will always have ours. And it's amazing historically how in those critical states that he won, even by a hair, it tracks the African-American experience from Georgia, where we picked cotton, to Pennsylvania, where we escaped on the Underground Railroad, to Michigan and Wisconsin, which African-Americans pioneered even before the Civil War. And then Michigan and Wisconsin again during the Great Migration after World War II. And also, a lot of people forget, the Great Migration after World War II included Nevada and Arizona, where African-Americans were involved in building the industry in all four of those states. So it was because of our migration, our movement, our peopling those places that we were heard. And in terms of our Latinx sisters and brothers, aside from Florida and some border counties in Texas, the Latino community, the Latinx community in Nevada and Arizona played a pivotal role too. They got it as well in terms of the incredible stakes in this presidential election.
Karen, I want your thoughts on the same rather quickly, because I also want to ask you about how do we have a transition with a president who didn't concede or hasn't conceded?
Certainly, Mayor. I just want to strongly echo what Mark has said. The exit polls are, just very noisy, and in this pandemic, I'm not sure the numbers are even close to what they are. But also, when we say, I'll take white women, there probably is a majority that voted for Trump because there was a majority in 2016. And, I think Biden did an excellent job overall on the white vote in bringing it up to, numbers above where Hillary had it. But we also have to look at where those votes actually are. So his vote is small city, rural, wealthy, older. So when there's other factors that are driving that vote, I think, and I think, in 2018, we started looking at the exit polls in 2016 and saying, gee, we had made a lot of mistakes. So I'd be really cautious about these numbers. Just reflecting on the transition, because I handled the transition for outgoing President Clinton. And, the GSA is a source of funding, ironically, a lease for the exiting president so he can have office space, and a number of other things that have to be done, his pension and what have you. And so clearly they're not doing any of that. I think the Biden team is handling it well. They're just moving on. If GSA doesn't anoint them, that means they don't have an office space. We're in COVID. Nobody has an office space. So, they're not losing anything. They don't get the money from GSA, but again, they've got a campaign fund that they can draw from. I think they've got to stay on message, keep doing the work the way they're doing it. And eventually, this will shake out. The 20th Amendment said he has to go by noon on the 20th of January. So there's no choice after that.
So, Mark, let me just sort of follow up, because we're getting short on time, not just in terms of the transition, but what about a peaceful transition? Romney's been clear, President George W. Bush has been clear in acknowledging that President-elect Biden is in fact the president-elect. And yet, I don't think McConnell or a great many others haven't weighed in. Lindsey Graham has suggested that he should continue to fight. Are you concerned about the environment given that dynamic?
Not at the moment, because they were selling wolf tickets about doing things this weekend, doing things all last week, and nothing has happened. As the younger generation says, I don't think they want any of that smoke. So, because I think people are prepared to respond. There will be a peaceful transition. I mean, I think for the most part, he may kick and scream, but I think that there are too many professionals in the military and the government and Secret Service and at GSA, the director notwithstanding, whose job is probably on the line, who want to keep those jobs and have themselves families to provide for and are not willing to risk their livelihoods participating in Trump's pathology or foolishness. So I think I'm pretty confident that it will go smoothly. I agree with Karen. Rise above it is what the Biden campaign is doing and continue to do it. They have enough money. You're right. There is no such thing as office space. And I think it speaks well of their magnanimity to go forward and continue to put a clean glass next to the dirty glass that is the Trump administration.
Well, I'm certain President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris would very much like to get 2 more seats in the Senate. Do you think we have a shot, or the Democrats have a shot at winning those 2 runoff seats on January 5th, Karen?
You know, I think we do, thanks to Stacey Abrams. And I don't think she can be thanked enough for all that she has done. You know, Trump won Georgia by 5 points. So she had to move 5 points and then some. And she did it. You know, there's a question about where the independents will be. You know, are independent voters going to be more concerned about split government than they are about, you know, Democrats running the table? So I think that's a concern, and it's a message opportunity that people have to address. Trump's not going to be on the ballot. So that means probably 2 things. One is, you know, his diehards may not care whether Perdue and Loeffler get in. But it also means, you know, there's a whole lot of people who are voting against him that might not come out. So we've got some energizing to do. But I think Stacey Abrams and her team down there have just done a magnificent job.
You think we can pull it off? The Democrats, rather, I should say, pull it off, Mark?
I don't think we have a choice. In order for the Biden-Harris administration to govern, they need a Senate. Mitch McConnell's already threatened to block cabinet appointments. And I think it's very doable. You know, people don't like to come back out for special elections, we know, but this is close enough it might be possible. After all, mail-in balloting for that January race begins November 18th, that soon. So it's just a question of keeping the momentum going. And Trump may help by not conceding, by blocking the transition. That will keep our troops mobilized and not too stagnant. And again, I'm still going to be easy on white women. You know, Karen talked about, you know, what they may have done, but I see the math doesn't work out for me. If suburban white women left the Republican Party in 2018 and helped the Democrats win the House, why would they go back in 2020? And even Trump didn't believe that because he was whining to them. Oh, white women, please don't leave me. I need you. He was saying that on the stump. Look at Kelly Loeffler's number in Georgia. She got the least votes of the 2 who made the runoff, Ossoff and Warnock, and even less than Perdue. So if that's true, I think that white women, a very important constituency, will be with us in Georgia. We know where black voters are. Stacey Abrams deserves all the credit in the world. This is how you build the new South. This is how you change the South. What she began several years ago is what Jamie Harrison has just begun. So who knows, in a few years, maybe we'll have South Carolina too. But I think we can win that race, and we must come January. All roads lead to Georgia right now.
Well, it's stimulating. It will be interesting to see whether there will be a new South. I dare say everybody's eyes will be on it, Republicans, most assuredly, as well as Democrats. Karen and Mark, as always, you have been terrific. providing insights about this very interesting, compelling election. And we do need to continue to drill down on what are the undercurrents that are upending our society so that to some extent we are splintered for what may be a variety of reasons. But thank you both so very much, and thank our IPPH On Air audience. And if you want to continue to follow us, you can at Instagram and Facebook, Politics Policy History, at Politics Policy History, and at Twitter, it's at Politics Policy 1. Thank you so very, very much. And until next Monday at 3, this is State of Play. Thanks so much.